You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom, this is Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and I want to welcome you to this week's SLA Insights. We've started a series here on output now, after completing several weeks on input. So now looking at output. And last week I started looking at some of the mental processes that are involved in producing output. And I have here on the screen a diagram that shows you how we move from input to output. So the input, from that we derive intake, and that goes into our developing system, and our brain works with it, processes it, acquires what we're going to acquire, and then from that we pull output. And output, of course, is 2 of the 4 language skills, speaking or writing. Now, to get from the developing system to output, we have 3 mental processes that we work through. Last time we talked about access. This time I'm going to talk about the other 2, monitoring and production strategies. So, with that, I want to talk a bit first by terms of definition. What is monitoring? A language learner or even a fluent speaker, if they are monitoring, it means that they can ensure that the utterance is both grammatically correct and socially appropriate before producing it. It also means that you can make a quick change, adjustment, correction along the way if your utterance is incorrect or perhaps misunderstood. Now, this can be very fast and virtually unnoticed by the speaker. For those fluent in English, as you're speaking English, you aren't sitting there with your monitor running all the time, or you're not aware that it's running, going, now which ending do I use? What word do I want here? It's just very quick and automatic, and it indicates that you really have fully acquired the forms that you're using, most likely implicitly. However, this process can also be rather slow and laborious. So you may get to a word and think, oh, what is the word I want here? Or what form do I need? Is it lay or lie? That's the one that gets me all the time. So that's your monitor working, making sure you're using the right vocabulary, the right grammatical form. And like I said, we do this in our native language too. So have you ever started to say something and then stopped because you weren't sure if you got the right word? That's your monitor. Have you ever said something incorrectly and not been aware of it until someone pointed it out? That was perhaps your monitor not working so well. Now, notice too that we are not just talking about making sure that we've got the grammar and the vocabulary right. We're also talking about socially appropriate utterances. So, you don't want to say something that's grammatically correct and then end up insulting the person you're talking to. That's also part of your monitor. Now, in some languages, including Hebrew and some modern languages like Spanish and French, they have different forms or different ways of saying things that, depending on whether you're speaking to a superior, an inferior, or an equal, you want to be careful which form you're using. And again, your monitor is going to help you decide which of the forms or which way of putting it together, what syntax you're going to use to appropriately address your recipient. So that's monitoring. That's how your monitor works. And again, this is part of how our mind works to get the output out. The third and final strategy here is production strategies. Now, the definition here is that these strategies allow the learner to string forms together in appropriate ways. The one producing the output not only has to be able to access it, that was the first one we covered in the last episode, monitor to make sure that you've got the right form, but also rearrange those forms and structures and vocabulary in countless ways to create meaning and hopefully connect with the listener or the reader who's receiving the output. So you may be able to access in your memory the word or the form you want to use. You may be able to monitor and make sure you've got the right form or vocab, and do it in socially appropriate ways, but you can still be unable to produce input, speaking or writing, because you cannot put those forms together in a meaningful way. So these are the three mental processes that come together to help you produce output. Access, that is finding in your memory the right form or word you want to use. Monitoring, making sure that it is, in fact, the right word or form. And then production strategies, stringing those words and forms together in a meaningful way. So the payoff, what does this mean for those of us who are acquiring or teaching languages? Well, think about it this way. These last two mental processes, especially monitoring and production strategies, are somewhat akin to the skills required to play a sport or to play a musical instrument. The more you practice, the more automatic these skills become. And at first, you are going to feel uncoordinated. In sports, like you've got two left feet. In music, what you're producing does not sound very good. But after time, over time, with multiple practices, regular practice, you get better at it. Your skills develop, and pretty soon, you're making the layups. Pretty soon, you're playing Bach and Mozart. But it takes that consistent practice, and it gets easier, it gets faster, it gets smoother, more automatic, and ultimately more fluent. But you've got to be patient with the process. And so if you're a teacher who's considering adding communicative language teaching to your teaching repertoire, you've got to be patient with yourself and with your students. It takes time. It takes practice, but keep at it. Keep trying. Keep adding new things. Keep doing it. And pretty soon, it's going to get faster. It's going to get easier. You're going to get more fluent. If you're a student, same thing. Be patient with yourself. Keep at it. Keep trying. Keep working at it. The other piece of this is keeping in mind, back to the diagram I had up at the beginning of the episode, it starts with input. You can't start with output. You've got to get the most input you can, get it into your developing system, because you cannot produce, in terms of output, what you have not received in input. So make sure you're getting plenty of comprehensible input. Be sure you're giving your students plenty of comprehensible input. And as that input is processed and acquired, then you have it available for access, monitoring, and the production strategies. So, by way of conclusion, just to review here, there are three processes, mental processes, that you need to use in order to produce output. That is, to produce speaking or writing in your target language. The first is access. You have to remember, you have to access in your memory the words you want to use, what they mean, have those form meaning connections. Monitoring is the second one. You've got to make sure that your utterance is grammatically correct and socially appropriate. And then finally, production strategies. You've got to be able to string those words and forms together to create meaningful and coherent communication. So those are the three production strategies, mental strategies needed for producing output. Next week, I'm going to talk about the output hypothesis. For comprehensible input, we have the input hypothesis. There is also an output hypothesis. And so we're going to talk about that next week, and it gives us a little insight into how output contributes to language acquisition. I hope you can join me for that episode, and I want you to have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.